Then I think we should start. So I will start by presenting myself. My name is Frédéric Claver. I'm an assistant professor in European history at the Center for Contemporary and Digital History at the University of Luxembourg. And I will moderate this session. I will start by a huge thank you to the dMSA team for setting up this event. Today we are going to speak about collective memory and artificial intelligence around a special issue of the Young Journal Memory Studies Review. This issue was coordinated by Sarah Gainsbourger, who you probably all know because she was president of the MSA some time ago. She's a research professor in sociology at the CNRS and Sciences Po. So this issue was coordinated by Sarah and myself. And as I see that Jenny Wustenberg is here, I think we spoke, Sarah and I, for the first time about AI and collective memory during a slow memory event a few years ago. When we published the call for papers for this issue of MSR in April 2023, we had with Sarah two ideas in mind, trying to answer the slightly provocative question, is AI the future of collective memory? Of course, it's an open-ended question with no firm answer. But we also wanted to set up an informal network that would create a bridge between AI scholarship and memory studies. I'll get back to this at the end of this event if we have a few minutes, but this is still an ongoing work. So artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is currently a hype, and the number of you who are today listening to us is probably a small proof of that. In fact, it's one specific branch, generative AI, of one branch, machine learning of AI, that is currently a hype. But AI is also rooted deeply in the history of computing, at least since Alan Turing's 1950 article, the famous Computing, Machinery and Intelligence article, that described, among other things, the famous Turing test. Maybe AI is also rooted in a deeper history as delegating cognitive tasks to machine is a quite old human dream. So what about collective memory? As you may know, generative AI, and more specifically large language models, are trained on huge data sets, and those data sets are embedding views on the past and some form of collective memories. Large language models are the foundation of today's chatbots, and in this sense, we can see those chatbots and the large language models behind them as a sort of new infrastructure for collective memory. At the same time, we thought with Sarah that memory studies works can also highlight the limits and the backlashes of this new form of memory in its social dimension. And this led us to raise our provocative, open-ended question, is AI the future of collective memory? For today, we have asked some of our authors to tell you more about that today. In order of talk, we will have Samuel Merrill, an associate professor at Umeå University's Department of Sociology and Center for Digital Social Research, who is specialized in digital and cultural sociologies, including the intersections between memory and digital technology, social media platforms, and AI systems. Then Julien Chou will have the floor. He's a professor of French literature at the Université Paris-Nanterre and deputy director of the MSH Monde. He co-leads the consortium Pictoria, dedicated to the application of artificial intelligence tools in the field of visual culture within the humanities and social sciences. Victoria Grace Richardson Walden is Professor of Digital Heritage, Memory and Culture at the University of Sussex, where she is currently Director of the Landecker Digital Memory Lab and Deputy Director of the Weidenfeld Institute of Jewish Studies. She explores the intersection between digital technologies and media cultures in relation to collective memory, and especially in regard to commemoration and heritage practices. And of course, last but not least, Alina Volinskaya, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Contemporary and Digital History at the University of Luxembourg. And her research explored the intersection of the history of science and technology, media studies, and digital humanities, with a particular focus on digital archives and their epistemologies. For today, Alina will speak about her doctoral research that was led at the EPFL in Lausanne. So we'll start with Samuel. And Samuel, you have the floor.
Okay, thanks very much, Frederick, for the introduction and the invitation. I'm going to start by directly addressing that provocative, open-ended question that Frederick and Sarah pose in their introduction to the special issue, which is artificial intelligence the future of collective memory? And I might also be, with my answer to this question, echoing slightly, as I realize now, after having prepared my notes and read in full Victoria and Mikola's paper, a point that they make in their conclusion. And I will go with a kind of bold, solid answer. AI is the future of collective memory, simply because we now live in a world where certain digital computational capacities have been achieved and certain quantities of data amassed to make the systems and tools that are collectively bundled under this label of AI sufficiently efficient to be rolled out at scale in a way that has captured the popular and obviously academic imagination. So it is the future of collective memory because it's here, and it's hard to imagine a future now without it. Similarly, though, it is part of the past of collective memory because it has long been with us. Now, if this is a rather kind of obvious and simplistic point to start with, I do so because I really want to stress that AI is only part of the future of collective memory, and there's nothing inevitable about that future, despite the often polarized utopian and dystopian visions surrounding AI. Pessimistic speculations about the end of human agency over memory, defeated on a new battleground by computational adversaries, are, I think, a bit far-fetched and perhaps intentionally overplayed. Sure, AI could contribute to the end of the so-called human memory. But in my opinion, that would probably only follow a circumstance where we see the extinction of the human race and the destruction of the planet. Now, these are not impossibilities, but ultimately much of our future with AI, and especially our immediate future, will not reflect the wholesale redistribution of mnemonic agency from humans to AI tools and systems. Instead, it will be determined by the shifting distribution of mnemonic agency at different moments and in different places in ways that further encourage the reconsideration of what it means to be human, and in turn the adoption of more relational approaches to memory in keeping with this kind of nascent fourth phase of its academic study. Now, this is essentially the core of the argument that I, along with Rick Smith and Thomas Smith, make in our contribution to the special issue, which is an article entitled Stochastic Remembering and Distributed Mnemonic Agency. But before kind of really briefly summarizing that article, I just want to provide a slight background to it. So Thomas, Rick, and I have worked previously on other topics within the framework of what, for want of a better term, we can call digital memory studies, especially in relation to two of the three main pillars of AI, being big data and algorithms, and often connected to empirical cases relating to activism. And again, activism is present in the paper that we've contributed to this special issue. But after writing a chapter on AI and social memory for a volume on critical AI studies, I wanted to learn a bit more about how AI chatbots might shape memory. So I applied for and received small project funds for the three of us to do this from Umeå University's Center for Transdisciplinary AI, otherwise known as TIGA, which is TAIGA. Now, actually, Tiger holds weekly online lunch seminars about AI on Fridays. And in fact, this Friday, Thomas, Rick, and I will be discussing the same article in a little more detail. So if you want to hear more, given how brief this summary will be, please do sign up for that or contact me for information. Anyway, coinciding beautifully with our pilot project, which took place in the autumn of 2023, was Frederick and Sarah's call for paper for this special issue. And so here I find myself. And here we can move to the article. So this article, besides wanting to analyze and further conceptualize how we remember with AI chatbots like ChatGPT and the distribution of mnemonic agency therein, in this article, we also wanted to start understanding and in turn explaining how these chatbots work from a wider memory studies audience. And we wanted to do this partly to satisfy our own curiosity, but also to mitigate some of the negative side effects of the hype surrounding AI that is now reaching memory studies in full force. Additionally, we wanted to start exploring how prompt engineering or simple prompt engineering techniques as a method might help us further understand the mnemonic agency of ChatGPT. And we did this through a case study focused on which 20th century activists the chatbot recalls when faced with certain user prompts. So these three kind of aims or tasks basically structure the article as it now appears in published form. And that basically starts with the first section where we outline how chatbots work in terms of three of their major juncture points. Okay, their training sets, their training tasks, and user inputs. And at the same time, in this section of the article, we recount the common critiques of chatbots that have been, at these particular junctures, as they've been rehearsed in the field of critical AI studies. So, for instance, we highlight the limitations of the training sets or the training data sets behind ChatGPT 3.5 and 4. Which were the versions that were most available when we were doing our research in terms of, for instance, their temporal span and their demographic and geographical diversity. And we also discuss how the large language models run on this data function kind of stochastically and are then trained through supervised training, tuning, and reinforcement learning from human feedback, and how these processes of training can be critiqued for introducing forms of human bias, even as they attempt to avoid other biases. And finally, in terms of user input, we discuss user expectations connected to this kind of imagined affordance of AI and also the anthropomorphism of chatbots, highlighting how these kind of affordances and this form of anthropomorphism may allow factual inaccuracies in generated outputs, commonly, we all know this, referred to hallucinations, to go undetected. So from that point, we go forward and we acknowledge that that the understanding of these biases inherent to AI chatbots and their associated critiques should certainly inform their mnemonic study. But in a second section, we then try to conceptually move beyond a kind of academic fixation on such bias. And we do this by drawing on post-humanist approaches from science and technology studies, including the work of Latour, Stiegler, and Hales, in order to emphasize this distributed mnemonic agency at work when we remember with ChatGPT. So as we write, the user and the chatbot prompt each other to remember. Now, recognizing that humans and technology have always been co-constitutive of one another, in turn helps us moderate claims about the wholesale redistribution of mnemonic agency from human to AI, in favor of instead recognizing that we are witnessing a shift in the distribution of mnemonic agency, and perhaps even a subtle redefinition of agency itself. So thus, the stochastic remembering of AI chatbots is brought to bear on the predominantly associative modes of human memory. Still, and additionally, we argue that the distributed mnemonic agency behind remembering with AI is never stable. It's not a case of a balanced distribution, but rather a constantly sliding scale from one moment to the next and from one setting to the next. So we go on then in the article to explore these conceptual matters by repeatedly prompting ChatGPT to remember 20th century activists using three basic prompts. And we did this, I think, 5 times in each case. So the prompts were: name 5 activists of the 20th century, name the 5 most well-known activists of the 20th century, and then name the 5 least well-known activists of the 20th century. So the outputs generated by ChatGPT reveal its stochastic functioning insofar as the first 2 prompts consistently returned the same 6 names, while the third prompt led to a much greater diversity of 17 names relating to 16 individuals. So this, through our reading, indicates something akin to the kind of long tail of ChatGPT's at least data set, or you might even say memory. Although it's important to note that ChatGPT is not naming these activists because it knows they are less well known or less frequently represented in its training data. It names them because they are stochastically most likely to be associated with least well known activists of the 20th century, that phrase in different tokens. Okay, so following this, we started to explore whether step-by-step and chain of thought prompting could provide a means for the user to exert mnemonic agency over the outcomes generated by ChatGPT. And very, very briefly, the first technique that we explored, we saw that it had relatively little impact within the confines of this kind of experimental method that we were using, but that the second showed some promise in forcing the model to produce certain mnemonic results, albeit by abiding to its stochastic logic. So the exact kind of exertion of agency is somewhat questionable there, still in my mind. Anyway, and to make sure there's enough time for everyone else, in conclusion, our article essentially empirically grounds arguments about how AI chatbots like ChatGPT create hegemonic and pleasing mnemonic outputs in line with their training data sets, their training tasks, and user prompts, and also other inputs. So we're not denying the risks that generative AI systems present regarding the so-called flattening or hollowing out of the past. And we acknowledge also that these risks will likely be increased by AI systems' ever-growing need for new training data and the increasing reliance on synthetic data, leading to so-called model collapse. But the end of human memory is not here. Moving beyond just highlighting the hegemonic bias of Gen AI tools, our article points to the complexity of the technical systems and the social, cultural, and environmental assemblages that sit behind any single AI-generated output. Within this post-human complexity, mnemonic agency is always shifting in its distribution between human and non-human, if we can allow ourselves to kind of slip back into this binary for a moment, and from juncture to juncture. So in this respect, collective memory's future will likely long be with AI, but not of AI. Even if, in the most pessimistic prognosis, our roles are reduced to only that of the ghost in the machine. And with that, I'll hand back to Frederick. Thanks for listening.
That was a great start. Thank you. I will simply give the floor now to Julien.
Okay, do you hear me? You can see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you so much. Thank you again, Frederick, for giving me the opportunity to be part of this collection of articles and to be part of this discussion. And I think I will be having the same kind of arguments that we just heard from Samuel. We already live in a world where what we remember, what we forget, how we access the past is determined not merely by historians, librarians, or even communities, but by artificial intelligence, which should maybe be better called artificial memories, because AI is becoming an active force in shaping collective memory itself. And to explore this, I wrote an article titled "So AI as Artificial Memory, a Global Reconfiguration of Our Collective Memory Practices." And I wanted to clarify first what we mean by collective memory, which is a deeply complex concept. Collective memory is not just history, it is how societies construct and transmit the past with different function, a social function, for example, because our memory is not just personal, it is shaped by communities through interaction, tradition, institution that help us recall and transmit the past. It has also a political function because nation states, corporation, different interest groups use memory strategically to construct narratives that support specific identities and ideologies. And it also has a democratic function because memory, a collective memory, is about accountability, preserving evidence of collective action, governance, historical injustices, for example. And collective memory is not static, so it is a dynamic process distributed among across multiple systems of information management, from libraries to digital platforms, from oral tradition to artificial intelligence. And for centuries, librarian, historian, museums managed collective memory. AI is taking over this role now, fundamentally reshaping how we document, store, and engage with history. I'm not sure people can still hear me. Do you still hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So AI is now a new digital memory system, an archiving and memory agent, because if we define memory as a process of selection, of preservation, transformation, and reactivation of knowledge, then AI already performs many of these functions. The function of selection, it decides what information is worth preserving or surfacing, whether through search engine, automated archive, or digital curation tools. It is a tool of transformation. It modifies historical data, whether by colorizing old photographs, filling gaps in damaged documents, or even rewriting historical text. And it is also a tool of reactivation because it helps reintroduce forgotten historical traces, such as resurfacing archival materials through a recommendation algorithm. And these functions are already embedded in the digital platforms that we use daily, shaping our interaction with history in profound ways. Because AI, as Frederick said earlier, is a lot of different tools, in fact, and I wanted to focus on two different kind of AIs. The first one would be more like machine learning and automatic processing AI, where we have algorithm to select, to store, to curate, and to filter historical traces, to decide which information is preserved and which disappear, and that influence what we see in search engines, in digital archives, and in historical databases. And also the second type would be generative AI, the kind that we talk about mostly when you talk about AI, where we have models like ChatGPT, Stable Diffusion, or DALL-E that don't just retrieve history or select or curate them, but synthesize history, and that allows for the generation of new narratives, new images, new texts, but which is a way to allow for creative reinterpretation, but also to introduce the risk of hallucination and distortion, as we said before. And just to show this kind of thing, I have a small case study around the Google Doodles. You know the Google Doodles, they seem like a harmless tribute to historical figures, for example, but behind them is a powerful AI-driven memory system that determines who is remembered, how they are framed, and where the legacy is preserved. How does Google Doodle work? Google doesn't randomly choose who gets the doodle. They are AI-powered data analytics that scan historical archives, search trends, user engagement metrics to decide which figures or events are worthy of commemoration. This means that historical significance is not the main factor. The main factor is engagement and popularity. Google also customizes historical memory based on location. In France, you might see a doodle about France Gall, the pop singer, but in the US, on the same day, you might feature a civil rights leader or a scientist. This means that Google is algorithmically shaping local memory, deciding which events are relevant to which communities. And when you click on a Google Doodle, for example, it just doesn't show information. It directs user through an AI-curated journey featuring, for example, Wikipedia summaries moderated by AI-powered editing tools, suggested search queries based on trending keywords, and links to streaming platforms, for example, prioritizing Google-owned services like YouTube or Play Music. Thus, the Google Doodles are not neutral acts of memory, they are algorithmic choices optimized for engagement and business interest. So this kind of algorithm are becoming a memory authority, where corporation and corporate algorithm dictates what is seen, read, and remembered. And memory in this kind of tools is basically optimized for engagement and not for historical accuracy. And memory is also fragmented and controlled through this kind of framing across different regions, leading to multiple algorithmically constructed versions of history. But Google Doodle are just one example, and now generative AI tools are also used to directly modify historical records. This is what we can see when we look at Wikipedia pages now, where there is more and more old photograph that has been altered, often without transparency, through AI tools to give a better view of what is being shown. Wikipedia, which is a key reference for collective memory, already hosts AI-enhanced images. For example, again with France Gall, the pop singer, on a web page, a Wikipedia page, you see retouched photos of Frank Gall and historical figures with improved clarity. And this modification range from removing imperfection to changing entire elements of an image. For example, in the case of one of the picture of on Franz Gall Wikipedia page on the left, you see that major modifications were made when you find the original picture, which is on the right. The colorization of a black and white picture, a background alteration that removed people, and also for some picture resolution enhancement that smooth detail, for example, changing facial feature subtly. And the problem is that many users assume that the AI altered image is historically accurate. And now, some tools like dMSA, for example, will allow users to animate historical photos to make figures blink, nod, or smile. And nowadays, you also have in AI in painting tools like DALL-E or Stable Diffusion that can generate missing sections of old photos or even synthesize entirely new historical image. And these technologies create a form of paradox because they make history more visually engaging, but they also risk erasing the imperfection and the context of the original picture, the original traces. And these AI-generated restoration may seem more real than the actual past, leading to a full sense of historical accuracy. And to conclude very briefly, so the rise of AI as memory agent marks a profound shift in how we archive, process, and recall the past, with large-scale models like GPT, Stable Diffusion, and DALL-E that do not merely store information, but they can synthesize, restructure, and reinterpret history, often without clear distinction between fact, fiction, and generative synthesis. And so as AI systems continue to evolve, we must confront a series of questions, which to say who controls this digital memory system? Currently, AI-driven collective memory is shaped merely by private corporations whose economic incentives do not necessarily align with historical accuracy, cultural diversity, or ethical responsibility. How do we ensure transparency and accountability in AI-generated history? The opacity of training datasets and algorithmic decision-making behind these models means that we risk delegating memory making to closed systems that prioritize engagement over veracity. And finally, what are the consequences of a homogenized algorithmic memory? AI models compress and standardize history, potentially flattening out the complexities of diverse cultural narratives in favor of an average memory optimized for searchability and consumption. But I want to finish on a brighter side, saying that despite these challenges, AI also presents an opportunity for historians. I think it allows for new ways of exploring the past, to reconstruct lost archive, to connect disparate historical traces in a way that human memory alone could not. So yeah, I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
You leave us with lots of things. So Samuel insisted on anthropomorphism, mnemonic agencies, and the stochastic nature of generative AI. You just showed, Julien, how something that became part of our daily life, the Google Doodles, are in fact powerful memory-based system, let's say, that modify the way we see the past. I will now let the floor to Victoria.
Thank you, Frederic. Share my screen. Can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Yay, good. Thank you to Frederic and Sarah for initiating this special edition and the idea of a network and spaces like this to carry on this conversation. I'm speaking today on behalf of myself and my colleague, Dr. Mikola McCortig. We've worked together for a long time and keep finding great opportunities to collaborate. Our article was called Imagining Human AI Memory Symbiosis, How Remembering the History of AI Can Inform the Future of Collective Memory. Anyone who's ever known any of my work knows I'm not very good at short titles, so I apologize for that. And at the heart of our contribution to the special issue was an interrogation of the problem of the anthropomorphism of AI. And I'm going to stumble over that word as well many times in this presentation. And in the tech industry and in academic fields concerned with AI development, you hear this narrative of an artificial superintelligence based on, but one day potentially superseding our cognitive capabilities. And that's very much been exposed as a useful myth through which to market models and to attract vast levels of funding. And this challenge is not simply coming from us fussy, critical people in the humanities, but from AI pioneers themselves, and most notably Niels Nielsen, one of the kind of founding figures in AI, and Yaron Lanier, who in his later professional life has become a deep critic of the field. So we took Frederic and Sarah's question, is AI the future of collective memory, and kind of perhaps started by kind of spinning it on its head. And we wanted to kind of remember key moments in AI development history. First of all, in order to really get to grips with what we're talking about when we're talking about AI in a kind of historical context. And then, as I like thinking in media archaeological ways, to be kind of speculative about that future that was being posed by the question. So we took the position that we don't really have the agency to say yes or no, maybe quite a depressing position. But rather that AI is already shaping collective memory, as colleagues on the panel have already shared. And thus it's kind of our duty as academics, we have an imperative to interrogate it, but to do so through a really nuanced lens of what it actually is in its own historical context, rather than kind of blindly accepting the narratives and norms established about AI in public discourse, which we know are driven by the tech creators, also by hedge funders, and that's often kind of misvalued as a group of people driving these narratives. And they want users to think about and the way they want users to think about it. We also wanted to avoid talking about AI in generalized terms, although we perhaps paradoxically don't talk about very specific forms of AI, but we're thinking about the history of AI development. And actually, when you look at the different types of models from conversational agents through to recommendation systems, they share a developmental history, at least at the root. Is characteristic of memory studies as well, but we all use the language of cognitive processes like remembering and forgetting to speak both about media reflections of the past and collective rituals and processes, just as in AI development and discourse we use terms like intelligent thinking and commands like understand. So that was our key thing there. We want to focus on the kind of specificities of AI. So I'm going to focus in this presentation on three of the kind of histories or pre-histories we mentioned in the paper, and then the three scenarios we suggest for the future. So in terms of kind of one of the histories, and we follow Neil Nielsen's history, very, very big, thick book about the history of AI development. And this is a very brief summary. I'm not going to summarize I think it's 500 pages long book, but some of the key prehistories he identifies are around kind of mathematics and logics, going back to, kind of ancient Greece through Leibniz, and that these are kind of fundamentally understood as influencing Boolean algebra, which is kind of fundamental to AI development. And then Freud's work on logic, which informed semantic networks. On the other side, though, and perhaps we're kind of not surprised that maths and logic informed AI development, Nielsen's looks back at the kind of history of thinking about the brain as well and learning. And he identifies these three fields of neuroscience, kind of Skinner's behaviorism and cognitive science. And I think what's really this particularly interested us because what he's looking at here is binary systems. So the work he's looking at neuroscience looks at the brain as kind of a bunch of ones and zeros in different parts. Obviously, Skinner is talking about reinforcement learning. And what we start to realize here is that a lot of these approaches are actually quite mathematical. What they're doing is applying mathematical interpretations onto the brain. And then AI development has taken those interpretations of the brain that already fit quite nicely into mathematical models, rather than looking at the brain and learning as diverse embodied concepts. And for me, as a pedagogue and someone in memory studies, and I'm sure many of you share this perspective, learning is a process that involves so much more than my mind or my physical brain. You know, it's culturally situated. It's also a very embodied and whole body exercise. So we came up with this very silly neologism rather than anthropomorphizing, but actually there's a history here that AI development and its prehistories mathemorphisize the complex world that we live in. The other one, and I'm glad it was mentioned already, is obviously Turing's famous imitation game. And in that article in the 1950s, he does ask that question, can machines think? But this is grossly misunderstood and kind of misremembered in literature across all disciplines. About a sentence or two after he asked that question, he rebukes it as a sort of pointless and useless question. Never do this in your work because it will be repeated over and over again, and we've learned this. And he asked the question was, what will happen when a machine takes the role of A in this imitation game? Will the interrogator decide wrongly as often when the game is played, like he does when the game is played between a man and a woman? Interesting whole conversation around gender in this piece of work, and kind of an agency, but also the crux of what he was arguing in that piece. And he said, can we distinguish between discrete stage machines and continuous stage machines? Discrete stage for him are computers, and we are an example of a continuous stage machine. He was not asking in that particular article whether human intelligence could be simulated. And very much the important thing here also is that it was a game, it was experiment, and a lot of AI development was playful and game-like. Another history, which is really significant to what we're talking about today's day with generative AI and the kind of conversational agents and chatbots, is Weizenbaum's ELIZA. The ELIZA chatbot, and Natal points this out, was an exploration of natural language processing that proved the illusionary character of computers' intelligence. And Weizenbaum was infamous for doing other quite illusionary presentations of the ideas of computer intelligence. Weizenbaum, so ELIZA was kind of set up like a Rogerian psychotherapist, and he was horrified by the feedback of psychotherapists who said, "Oh, like this is great. We could get it to do our work. We don't have to listen to patients anymore." Weizenbaum reflects in his kind of key work around kind of, which is a book where he's constantly reflecting on the problems of AI development and his own role in that. So kind of in that darkest moment, your darkest moments in life when you might reach out to a human professional, probably because you don't feel like you have agency, you don't feel like you're being listened to in the world, you're desperately seeking is for another human being to listen to you, not for that human to go, oh, finally, I can just pass this on to a chatbot, to a conversational agent. And yeah, we know that actually in the NHS and in other health contexts, this is really being used now. So what Weizenbaum would think of this particular moment, I'm not sure. So those were kind of some of the histories or prehistories we wanted to focus on in terms of thinking about illusion, about misinterpretations, about simulation, about game, and about mathemorphizing. So if that is what AI kind of is in its own historical context, how might we think about some scenarios for the future? So our first was the status quo. Quite simply, we keep thinking about AI and talking about it as if it's simulating or could simulate human thought. And in those kind of simulative approaches, all you end up doing is reinforcing hegemonic narratives, getting AI to do things that you can already do, but just at scale, or or just repetitively. And I think these questions around Wikipedia and the Google Doodle are really good examples of that. And AI sort of offers nothing new for how to think about and rearrange collective memory. The other scenario is that you recognize AI's distinctiveness, but you unfold it still into kind of established collectives. So here you kind of de-anthropomorphizing AI, but you're still recognizes it's some kind of single entity or being. So it's still being positioned in the idea that's sort of like the automation, like the golem, and it has an agency perhaps equatable with humans. And it may, in this kind of scenario, empower marginalized voices. And I think a lot of the work in indigenous epistemologies talks about this, but it maintains a sense of sort of selfhood, which downplays that AI are not just beings or entity or agents, but they're complex systems already kind of enfolded in a number of kind of circuits of human and AI symbiosis. So our third scenario, and perhaps what we might see as the ideal one, is to kind of fully de-anthropomorphize AI and kind of fully break out this idea of it as like an agentic agent, a singularity, and as such. And this would extend those questions of relationality that start to appear in the second scenario, but recognize this radical alterity. And here it's about recognizing the symbiosis, that AI is a complex amalgamation of different systems already incorporating the human in the loop, as Simon Lingering very rightly talks about. Maybe we should flip this and talk about AI in the loop. But why bother to think about AI in this kind of futuristic and historical way? And why bother to have this kind of symbiosis approach? And this kind of ideas in our conclusion, I think, is what we hope might allow us to think about the significance of symbiosis and what humans and AI systems do differently, but where they already come together and where they could come together more productively. So on one hand, humans tend to bring ethical and cultural valuing of data. AI is more kind of logical and probabilistic in how the mathematical models are set up. We culturally prefer narrativization, but we train our AI models to treat data modularly. We're better at qualitative deep narrow readings, where AI works at scale and breadth and processes data quantitatively. Human bias tends to be mostly shaped by affect and ideology. AI system bias is based on the logic of statistical principles and the line of best fit. And we position some ideas for kind of constructive confrontations then between kind of human and computational values in the piece. And again, this is thinking very much about symbiosis. So AI models are very much based on the idea of ground truths, and maybe where we can emphasize our human agency in these existing AI systems already is by questioning ground truths and enabling diverse and possibly conflicting tagging in data. Why do we have to define a particular event or a memorial in one way? And we know in human culture that we have these competitive but also multi-directional memory moments. Can we code this or program this into our AI models as well? And the other one is kind of turning away from the logic of best fit and programming systems to specifically bring to the fore the outliers. It's arguably mathematically possible because they're data points, but we just prefer the nice line down the middle. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Victoria. Yes, confrontation is something that we should do. Thanks a lot for those views at the same time on the history of AI and the possible futures. It's interesting that you mention Weizenbaum and Eliza, because when basically Weizenbaum spent the rest of his career warning about AI and writing books about that. And the first people who harshly criticized him and criticized his books were basically members of the Stanford AI lab. And that will be my transition to Alina's talk.
Okay. I hope you see the slides. Thank you very much, Frederick. It's been a pleasure to participate in the issue and also to be a part of this conversation. So for me, discussing AI and memory together is interesting as a part of a larger conversation about how technologies mediate, intervene in, and reshape our relationship with the past, and to some extent with the future as well. I approach this topic from the science and technology studies perspective, and I draw on a kind of techno-hermeneutic framework. So the question of how non-human agents, machines, large language models take part in interpretation, mediation, transmission of both memory and technology. So that's kind of a general framework. While we all agree that computer memory and collective memory are fundamentally different instances and we shouldn't be treated as direct analogs, what happens when computers become so embedded in memory practices that the boundaries between the two start to somehow blur? In my contribution, I engage with this question by looking at one particular case, which is the collective memory of AI itself, of AI community, and one of its specific sites, which is the SailDart archive. The SailDart is an unofficial archive of the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab, which is one of the key sites in the history of AI research, known for its projects in machine learning, robotics, knowledge representation, its influence on tech industry, and so on and so on. So SailDart holds backup files from the lab's computers from 1972 to 1990. So it's not just a collection of documents, but rather a digital record of an entire environment, capturing everything from programming notes and pieces of code to computer-generated program files, but also messages, drafts, and other traces of Stanford hacker culture. Here is a small selection of files, which includes an essay by John McCarthy, some snippets of lab notes, computer-generated DMP files, fragments of code. So what we have here is an entire digital record of a life of one particular lab, of a specific community whose entire life revolved around a computer, where computers served as both a means and an object of research, an object to interact with and through. So on the one hand, SailDart functions as quite a typical lieu de mémoire, as a site of community memory, curated, maintained, preserved by former lab members, continuously commented on, reinterpreted by the AI community itself. That said, SailDart is also something else. It's a machine-made archive. It was generated and structured by computer, following the uniform logic of a machine. The archive consists of computer backups created by a specific backup program, which operated automatically based on some predefined conditions, determining, for example, which types of files should not be archived, such as temporary or empty files. And with the exception of those files, the program systematically saved the entire contents of lab's computers and assigned metadata to them. So SailDart is not an archive made through the practices of selection and evaluation of what is worth remembering and what's worth forgetting, but rather a record produced and stored within the logic of a machine. And moreover, it remains accessible only through the other layers of technological mediation, through the layers of media conversions, translations, and so on. So the archive basically stayed alive over the years only because it has been continuously migrated across media, re-encoded, reformatted. And SailDart thus presents a configuration where the computer emerges not just as a vessel of memory, just a vessel for memory as a storage facility, but also as its mediator and even in a way the agent of memory work. In this sense, it's formed a kind of hybrid ensemble, bridging the social and the technical, both collective memory and computer memory. And this configuration results in different effects. It transforms and redefines the very notions of recall, remembering, forgetting, preserving. But one question I would like to address is how to make sense of such an archive. If the SailDart holds tens of thousands of files written in a range of outdated languages created for different systems, machines, and applications. So as a curator of the SailDart written, most of the software to be read in the SailDart is painfully primitive and requires a level of expertise similar to that of an Egyptologist who can read Second Dynasty hieroglyphics. I believe there are fewer than 1K persons alive who can easily read PDP-10 assembly language, and that goes also for a lot of files within the SailDart archives. So how to make these kind of archives accessible both to historians and, for instance, to contemporary AI community? For that, we need some form of automatic understanding or automatic translation from machine language to human language. And this is where modern AI models like ChatGPT can come into play. They can step as mediators or translators of obsolete, non-human readable scraps of code, these fragments of computer memories. And here I provide an example of how ChatGPT can help to decode a piece of a SailDart code, in this case, a music synthesis program which would otherwise remain obscure. So ChatGPT identifies the language of the code and enables translation basically. Metaphorically speaking, in this process, AI algorithms can be seen as medium for understanding their own past. And here I also come back to this idea of understanding on whether the AI can think that we just talk about. There is indeed a long-standing tradition of debate around whether AI can understand, dating back not only to Turing's imitation game, but also to philosophical debates, for example, by John Searles with his famous Chinese room experiment. Searle basically argues that AI cannot understand, but can only follow the steps of a computer program. But when it comes to the machine memory of SailDart and the various machine artifacts it stores, understanding means precisely being able to trace the steps of a computer program. In a sense, to understand something like ELIZA or its Stanford successor Perry, one should not focus on the model response in dialogue, as a classical hermeneutic understanding conception require, but rather focus on its algorithm, the sequence of steps it follows. So in this case of computer-based collective memory, AI algorithms seem to be a fitting tool for interpretation. In a way, AI might be better equipped to understand these very particular memory artifacts than a member of today's AI community. And this is precisely where I see its potential contribution to collective memory. So to conclude and getting back to the central question of the issue of whether AI is a future of collective memory. So SailDart is one of the earliest born digital archives, but as time goes on, we will see more and more this complex techno-social ensembles which will require increasingly sophisticated and machine-based forms of interpretation. And it is in this sense that AI might be indeed the future of collective memory, though I'm saying it without any technological optimism about that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Alina. Indeed, questioning, being able to question and to read machine-structured archives is something that humanists and social scientists will have to learn in the quite near future. Using AI to read the machine-structured archive to understand how an AI lab works, that is also definitely fascinating. I think we can switch now to the question and answers session. Okay. And I'm a bit annoyed because I don't remember how it works on Teams. Here it is.
So everybody can ask, can unmute the mics now and switch on cameras. And we have also Q&A when you can write your questions.
Thanks. So would like to start? So nobody has any question. So I will have, oh, someone? No. So then I will have one question, maybe to all of you. Oh, there is one raised hand. Sila Sudenze, can you take the floor and ask your question? Please.
Silas, I think you need to unmute yourself first. Can you unmute yourself or? Okay, try now, unmute yourself. I try once more, please.
Maybe in that case, you can try to ask your question in the Q&A part of Teams.
I have a question.
Okay, go.
Hi, that was a great presentation by everyone. And I have a question in regards to, have you guys seen the use of AI to restore, I know you mentioned like restoring images, but try to restore the past and how it's been used maybe by museums? Like, have you seen it, you know, like used by institutions in that regard?
I may have an answer, but maybe someone else wants to. Yeah. Yes, Victoria.
Yeah, good question, Pamela. The context I'm looking at the moment is particularly around Holocaust memory and Holocaust memorials museums, and the obvious one that gets touted out in that context is Dimensions in Testimony, which are the interactive biographies with survivors and now many other different kinds of people, historical and contemporary. And I think one of my concerns in that field, in that context, is that the word AI is being kind of rolled out because it's a useful buzzword and not actually with a nuance of understanding what it is. So really, those that don't know how DIT works, it's very, very supervised. It's, you know, a survivor gives 500 answers, or now a more recent one's 1,000 answers to that number of questions, and they're very much mapped as question and answer set. So it's not it's not a large language model like a ChatGPT. In fact, it's probably a micro small language model. But I've heard people from USC refer to it only very recently as an LLM. And in policy spaces in that sector, lots of people referring to that, and in general, the use of LLMs in the Holocaust memory and museum sector. And one of the projects that actually used that, the DIT in a VR or alongside a VR project, the headlines in the UK around that project were AI is the future of Holocaust memory and education. So I think whilst institutions sometimes think they're using it, at least in that context, and I know other museum sectors are using it in kind of slightly more sophisticated ways, but in the context that I worked, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what AI is. And another example is around chatbots. There's 2 Holocaust chatbots, Marbles of Remembrance, which was in Telegram, and then Houses of Darkness, but they're not AI. They are decision tree multilinear narratives that you can click through. They're interactive, but they don't in any way even use machine learning technologies. But they use that word chatbot because they look like chatbots. They've been designed to, they have the aesthetic of a chatbot, but they're not actual conversational agents.
Thank you, Victoria. I would add, yeah.
Can I ask a naive question?
Yes, of course.
My own work comes out of the early days of memory studies, and I have found this session quite fascinating, and I've learned from all of you. And I guess a question I would ask is if anybody would like to reflect a little bit on the relationship between the idea of habit in biological memory and the notion of the algorithm in artificial memory. Is there a relationship between the two, or how do one understand the relationship between the two? Because habits of mind are so incredibly powerful in biological memory.
Okay.
Is
Thanks
the
a lot.
algorithm creating habits? This is the habits of this machine-driven kind of intelligence.
Hi. Yeah, I'll have a thanks for that question. It's really interesting question, and I haven't obviously got a fully formulated answer ready to go on this. But strangely enough, I'm working on a piece which is using on a chapter that uses Casey's phenomenology of remembering and habit memory in relation to AI is increasingly threading through all of our social media platforms as well, but in relation to Facebook's memory function, which algorithmically returns your own content from the past. And so this is really a very open reflection on that, but to have that question that connects these two things quite closely is really encouraging, because it pushes us to think this through. And I suppose like there is a habit, there is a rhythm to these algorithmic systems as well, right? Especially when we're talking about throwback apps in social media that you will notice. So through my own kind of auto-ethnographic, phenomenological research on this, you will see the same things algorithmically return to you, especially if you're not that active on Facebook like myself, on the same date. So there becomes, and that in itself, through my experiment with this, I realized that, it's habit inducing. One's involvement with these apps, which rely on algorithms, are habit inducing. So you do get this kind of feedback loop, which in another way kind of speaks to the same general kind of ontology that I use when thinking about memory, is that it's about these interrelationships between these, what we might think as very biological, I think you said, and very computational processes of memory actually being deeply entangled. Yeah. So it's besides that, I can't say anything else, but but thank you for that comment, because it kind of lends credence to what I'm trying to do in talking to both algorithms and habits at the same time.
It's good. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thanks a lot. There is a follow-up questions on Patrick Hutton's question from Thomas van de Putte. I am wondering if when researching collective memory in AI, we are somehow forced to equate memory with knowledge. How do the two, memory and knowledge, differ in AI research, if at all? That's an interesting question. I've got my point too, but maybe some other speakers will like to answer. Okay. So,
if no one else wants to have a stab.
I think it's a quite hard one. I think first there is a difference between hardware and software in this case. memory in computing can be first a hardware thing. At the same time, RAM, so the sort of living memory, the thing that is used by your computer to function every minute, and then what used to be hard drives, now SSDs and other devices to store information. But it doesn't mean that in computing and AI, memory and knowledge are the same. And I think it depends on, so let's say that knowledge or maybe more information is stored on hardware, but then there is how you design an algorithm to access this hardware and to access the information that is stored on it. And in the case of generative AI, there is first a way to treat the information, which is through a training process. And then a way to give it back to the user, for instance, which is, in that case, it's what some said about the stochastic part. The restitution of information will be, in the case of generative AI, probabilistic. And it's maybe in this process, this stochastic process, that there is a difference in AI between memory and knowledge. I'm not sure that you all agree about that, but I think there are several layers to consider to answer this question. I hope, Thomas, that I answered your question, or at least give some leads to the answer. I will thank Ana Luisa for the link that she sent in the question and answer thing, but I don't think that it leads to a question. Marisol Ortiz asked the following one: how do you see the use of AI in transitional justice mechanisms such as truth commissions and special trials? On this one, I'm totally not competent. So would one of the speakers like to answer? I think it's a very interesting question, and not only about transitional justice, by the way. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, we will not have an answer to this one. So Silas asked, could any of the presenters, maybe Dr. Merrill, say something about glitch memories, AI and its place in collective remembering and forgetting? Sam?
I've been named. So, glitch memories in terms, I mean, I think this is an interesting term that I hope I'm not misinterpreting, because I think people use it in different ways, but in terms of kind of falsely implanted or unintentional mnemonic consequences from the use of AI. What do I want to say about this? I mean, I think without being dismissive in my own research, I think some of this talk kind of comes back to a kind of focus on content or product over process, and early cognitive scientists and early theorists in social memory and kind of social psychological studies of memory kind of have highlighted this distinction. And I think this also, now I'm starting to ramble maybe, but this also connects to what we're trying to do in the article a little bit by moving beyond bias. These things are concerns. They shouldn't be trivialized, but I think personally I'm more interested in maybe the processes that lead to these glitch memories than maybe the glitch memories themselves, because that points to the kind of agency in a very kind of Luturian sense of AI technology, as in these kind of outcomes that weren't intentioned by the human designers. So I mean, there's so many ways you could take this question. So I don't know. I think I'll leave it at that. I mean, there's so many in terms of also in terms of legal settings and what it does in terms of false testimonies in legal settings or false memory syndrome and stuff in kind of cognitive science and stuff. So I think I will leave it at that. Other than say, I think the process behind this is quite an interesting thing that should be looked at in more detail, obviously. Or Spurs. Maybe that sparks any other thoughts amongst the group.
Thanks a lot. Does someone else have some thoughts about that? Yes, Victoria.
It made me think about Andrew Hoskins' recent piece, which I think he talks about glitch memory in terms of that's what I'm talking about. The kind of images that are created there, and I mean, sometimes I think we can be prone, and I guess it's an opposite de-anthropomorphization. We can be prone to sort of using computational language in memory contexts uncritically, because in a way, many memories are glitches, right? Memory in itself is full of glitch, and we can talk about testimonies being used in public trials, transitional justice contexts, and this they're already unstable and vulnerable kind of artifacts because they're memory based. And we might argue materials are memory based as well. So I think memory is full of glitch, and actually all you're seeing there is a computational form of creating something that is glitchy of the past. I'm going to ramble if I carry on talking, so I'll be quiet.
Okay, thanks a lot. Well, I think you both gave some leads to think about that. Next question. Thought Barbara Ronchetti. It would be interesting to know more about the forms by which it is possible to de-anthropomorphize AI, and I think this one is for Victoria.
Thanks. I mean, I would flip the question and say, why do we anthropomorphize? I can't say that word anymore. I said it too many times today, sorry. Why do we adopt a human-centric or human language to talk about something computational? And I think Alina's piece was wonderful. Actually, what these tools are particularly useful for is reading computational language and translating computational language and logics, which we can't read unless we're really computer nerdy. And that's what they're useful for. They're perhaps useful for that translation between one realm and the other. I think we have a tendency to want to use this language, and I think many of us, and Sam is well, a group of us who is leading a group of us in kind of working through some of the impulses and the perspectives, critical perspectives in which we talk about AI and how to challenge assumptions. And I think we just constantly need to challenge ourselves in how quickly we adopt human language. So I try and talk about the prompt and the response, or the output and the prompt. Even response, that's the sound, or the answer. It's not an answer. It's not a conversation that you're having. It's not a chat. It's thinking there's that computational language. So it's a prompt and an output. And I think the more we stop ourselves using that human language to talk about computers, that's how we do it, because it isn't that we've been told to put that language onto computers. And I think we should,
I would add that there is a difficulty, which is what we put in the call for papers at the beginning, that, for instance, the notion of memory was the notion of memory in computing was inspired by how we supposed human memory was working, but it's not working like that. And now we are using computing memory as a way to describe how human memory is working. And so in this case, it's quite hard to de-anthropomorphize computing, because basically, at least for the notion, that there is a cross influence. Another question in the Q&A. to Victoria and Sam again, but I think we could all answer that. What do you think about, so it's Laura Cortes, what do you think about the ethics of feeding LLM systems with testimonial data, so transcription of interviews with witnesses? Should research be done locally or in private configuration instead of sending the information for these systems to continue training? Is trauma something that could or should or not be modeled in this large system? I will allow myself to say that we have projects ongoing on the C2DH about oral history that will at one point address that kind of questions. And I will also precise that there are ways to use smaller models that you can use on your computer, and that solves parts of the ethical problems. And those smaller models are less impressive than Claude or ChatGPT, but they're quite good at being trained or fed with additional data. So Victoria and Sam, if you have something, or the others, either way, something to add. Yes, start, Victoria. No, okay.
Not working. I mean, I guess, yeah, I don't know. Does Vicky want to speak? Or I think, I mean, again, I don't want to sound hopeless here, but or not hopeless in the sense of having no hope, but I think sounding hopelessly uninformed. But I think these are such context specific kind of questions that should determine this. I think, and on a very wide general scope, I think it's quite what I'm thinking about when I hear questions like this, rather than thinking yes or no, you should or you shouldn't, you know, maybe there's a way in the middle ground, or depending on, you know, whether it's Mistral or OpenAI or some other company and the kind of ideologies and the kind of systems in place is, what actors and what voices are calling for it or whatever like this, but also in terms of how we're thinking about data, because one thing I've been trying to think through very, very abstractly is this kind of idea that data is the new oil. And we all know oil is non-renewable, but I'm starting to wonder if data is non-renewable or renewable or not. And this obviously wraps in with ideas of synthetic data and model collapse, and where in the absence of giving you know, the ethical challenges around if you actually withhold data, human data from LLMs, they'll be more inclined to rely on synthetic data, and then some of these kind of as it's been termed, you know, kind of degenerative conditions where it's just kind of over emphasizing certain elements over other elements will become even more pronounced. So there is an ethical question. I don't have a straight answer to should research be done locally or any of these questions, but it's these kind of questions we need to be dealing with as a field, basically, and we need to be dealing with them as a field in collaboration with many other disciplines. So I think that's a point that I constantly are trying to make, is that we need to speak more with computer scientists, right, about these things, and we need to get into these decisions or into the discussion surrounding these decisions earlier in the process, rather than retrospectively in relation to one tool or another. So yeah.
Sam's made a lot of great points. Sorry, I couldn't find my mouse pointer. It flitted off onto my other screen and wasn't coming back. I think in some ways the kind of commercial tech companies that are leading this field have created a kind of catch-22 system, and I think this also happened with the advent of social media. So I don't think it's and potentially early media forms as well. On one hand, if you don't engage in these big commercial LLM models, if you don't feed certain kinds of data in it, and the data we're talking about here is It's memory sources, it's trauma, but it's often victim-led and it's witness-led, and it's the voices that are endangered in catastrophes and atrocities. If we don't feed that data into these systems or make it available for these systems to read, then the bias that these systems produce is it eradicates the voices of those people. And I think that's a really difficult tension, because we don't just want to, we know these models do horrific things with data, and do we want to be kind of complicit in those issues? On the other hand, if you just want to use these models locally, they are incredibly resource intensive in money, in people, in technology. And the majority of memorials and museums with vulnerable testimony collections who want them to be more accessible just don't have that resource. Even massive Holocaust museums, when I go and talk to them, I say, like, not the very, very big, but the kind of big ones in Europe, say, oh, I am the digital department, and it's one person working on a Friday, and they're actually a historian. They know how to code. And that is a reality. We've interviewed loads of people at lots and lots of different memorials, and that is a reality. And at other memorials, it's bunches of volunteers like trying to collate archive stuff together. They didn't even work out how to index the material they have, the physical stuff, let alone thinking about digital technology. So and in those kind of contexts, it's really hard to resource. But then you've also got the access, and what the kind of reading you could do if you're a very small institution on a quantitative big data level with these kind of models could be really powerful if they and the localness protects that. But we use local systems to transcribe our interviews, and we've just had to hire a freelancer to do the human checking, right? Because it says things like the Auschwitz revolution or resolution when it means concentration camp. So the language that you're hearing, and it's making up little stories about all the children in the town being in hospital, when the phrase is the children who live in this town come to this museum. So there's these bizarre hallucinations that come up when most of it looks accurate. So you need that resource to check as well. So this is what we were talking about, this kind of symbiosis there. This idea of automated magical systems doing everything perfectly is a bit of a myth. But I think we are stuck in this sort of dilemma. And the fact that we're kind of asking these questions is like, why are we even asking the question, do we need to have we decided it's inevitable that we need AI models? And so that the question we're having is, should they be local or should we engage commercially? When the question probably should be, should we be using AI in this context at all? Yeah.
Thanks a lot. We have just 5 minutes left. There is a last question from Anja Gusenheimer. So I'm sorry, I think I mispronounced all the family names, all your family names. So I'm sorry for that. How do you see the representation of minorities, for instance, minority language groups as Yucatec Maya, under AI influence in the future? This is a quite important one. Basically, I would myself answer that their future is in the training datasets that are used to train generative AI systems. If in those datasets there are enough documents written, because they need to be written, in minority languages, then they will be more or less properly represented. But most of the large language models are trained on English resources. So the representation of minorities will be basically linked to North American and British views on those minorities for now. There are exceptions. There is a foundational model called Bloom that was trained on around 50 different languages, including, for instance, Wolof. So there are ways to make large language models better at representing minorities, but most of the commercial services you will access are not considering minorities and minority languages. Does someone want to add something?
No, I mean, I just, if I gave a plug for Tiger recently at the beginning of my talk, which is this transdisciplinary AI research center at my university, and they give out micro projects, and we have a project that's just finished, which is related to what you're asking, Antje. So it was looking at this, like how Sami language is affected by large language models in Sweden. So if you're looking for stuff like that, I would just point you towards Tiger's website and you can have a look at that. But it's exactly that. I would echo your answer otherwise, Frederick. I think maybe there's one thing in general with all these questions, I think, to say about our individual kind of complicity and commitment to getting to grips with all this, because I feel quite uneasy being asked many of these questions, because I'm going down a process of kind of getting to grasp with it all and trying to be committed in that. And it's an ongoing, never-ending process because of the nature of the technological developments we're dealing with. So I think there's also something there which is an ethical question and a kind of responsibility that we need to accept, each of us individually.
Yeah, right. I fully agree. I think that we have reached the end of this event. I again thanks the dMSA team for organizing it. I will do a bit of advertising, so you can find the special issue online on the Memory Studies Review website, which is hosted by Brill. I will also share with you this, which is basically a website that we have set up based on the special issue and on a seminar that we organized in 2023 with Sarah. We'll find there a bibliography on AI and memory studies, and you can join a mailing list that is not really working at the moment because we are not a lot who subscribe to it, but I hope that in the future it will work better. It's artificial-memory.net. So thanks a lot. Thanks to our speakers, thanks to the dMSA teams, and thanks to all those who are here today to listen to us.